What's the major governance problem in the world today? Don't give me this rule of law stuff. That's a slogan that gets us nowhere. The world is not based on the rule of law, it never was. It has partial rule of law, but it's got other institutions that commend to it a reasonable stability. One of them is the threat of war. The other one, of course, much more favorable in my view, diplomacy, balance of power, international institutions. A man by the name of Hedley Bull, who died very young in Australia no less, wrote about this a long time ago, but it still remains true. Let's not reinvent the wheel, and let's not be holier than thou. Rule of law is a slogan. But here's where rule of law becomes very sensitive and very dangerous, as it were, when you have two systems of rule of law that clash up against each other and compete for unclaimed territory, as it were. And herein lies perhaps the most complex governance challenge internationally of this early 21st century. I'll give you the example. What happened in the Ukraine conflict? Well, you can divide it into a morality play between us in the West and the Russians, one side good, one side evil. That's too simplistic. You can talk about personae, Putin, Yanukovych, Obama, and so on. Again, too simplistic. The most persuasive argument is a systems argument. You had two major blocs, the European Union and the Eurasian Union, Eurasian Economic Union. One consisting of 28 states, post-Second World War, the most important peace project in the world, and a huge regulatory regime, very successful, but also attracting a huge number of states who want to live the good life. Everybody wants to be in the European Union, as it were. You can't even get out. Look at the poor Brits. The Eurasian Economic Union. That's an embryonic union, much less the good life, but still a regulatory regime of some gravity, led by Russian thinking and practitioners, but not only Russia. It's got about 4 or 5 states, depending on one's calculus and one's prospects. Azerbaijan, Armenia, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, and of course Russia. And here you had this giant state in between, Ukraine, and they were essentially competing for that real estate. Not territory as such, not people as such, but regulatory coverage. Who's going to regulate this market? If the European Union gets it in 2014, then it's a net loss for the Eurasian Economic Union. And the reverse, if the Eurasian Economic Union gets it, the European Union is the net loser. And Ukraine was boxed in and torn apart. And within itself, not having a sufficiently talented governing class, indeed I would say an incompetent governing class, a constant problem in that country, it was not able to swivel and negotiate between these two gravities. And they themselves were not aware of the essential competition that was happening. And herein lies a precursor to some of the great potential conflicts of this early 21st century. How do big economic blocs, the European Union, the Eurasian Economic Union, Asian blocs, the various Asian blocs, particularly Chinese-led blocs that are forming, and of course NAFTA, a huge trading regime. How do they interact and how do they deal with real estate? Let's give you another theater in which such competition is happening, where there's a great prospect for friction and conflict, and let's try to decide how we can solve it. Moving away from Eastern Europe, let's look at another theater where there's grave competition, indeed regulatory contradictions between some of the great economic blocs and potential conflict down the road. What theater? The Arctic theater. Imagine essentially this is the Arctic theater, the Arctic Circle more or less. On this side you've got, when you're looking down as it were, on this side you've got NAFTA. That's Canada, the United States, and Mexico, or in the less elegant modern manifestation, should it be ratified, I hope it's not ratified, that's a different lecture, USMCA. So NAFTA 1.0, NAFTA 2.0 exerts a gravitational pull on this Arctic space and wishes to impose a certain regulatory environment on it, controlling shipping, controlling economic exchange, controlling labor, of course, controlling science, controlling air travel, and so on. From this side, you've got the European Union, that huge regulatory regime, perhaps the most powerful in the world, that was at the heart of the Ukrainian conflict, pulling, as it were, against the gravity, again, of this ever-present third economic bloc, the Eurasian Economic Union. Russia, Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, Belarus, and so on. So you've got three blocks pulling on this Arctic space, and you've got a fourth one coming, because Asia is alive and well in the Arctic space. You recall I said Yukon in Canada is closer to Beijing than Sydney is close to Beijing. All right, that's surprising to most Canadians. It's not as surprising to the Chinese. So the Asian blocks are here. There are too many to identify, but China leads the lot and is the most ambitious and the most Arctic, as it were, disposed. You get four pulls here in the Arctic. What are we to do? Well, the rules of the game here are yet to be set. I'd like to introduce a concept here through our Global Brief lectures I call interstitial tendons. Interstitial tendons. T-E-N-D-O-N-S. It's a concept that is yet to be elaborated in practice, but the idea is essentially you take these different economic blocks. One is not more virtuous than the other. Let's put aside the morality plays. How do they interact? Well, there need to be some sorts of flexible mechanisms, I call them tendons, right, that allow them to not collide or to not pull the contested real estate apart. Should they pull this apart, you've got war. You've got essentially the bombardment of an atom. And that's what happened in the Ukrainian scenario. Pulled apart, the atom was bombarded and it released terrible political, strategic, economic, cultural energy, which was difficult to put back together. In the Arctic space, it would be even more deadly. These are all great powers surrounding. They're huge economies, and any rupture here could rupture the entire world. Interstitial tendons, let's find a way to make it work.